me adjust this one a little bit. A little crooked, but oh well. What can you do? Okay. Sorry, other camera's a little bit too. Okay, so, sorry, allergies, but today I'm going to be talking about molds, everything about molds, different mediums to use with the molds, and the differences between all the various mediums that you've heard of. Each one has its own unique characteristics with the molds, so depending on what you're using, you're going to have to apply it or do it a slightly different way, and then I'm going to explain to you what to expect with the different products. So I'm going to talk about what you can, what it's going to look like once it's done, basically. So I know that you've probably heard about resin. There's casting resin. You've probably heard about clay, so modeling clay. There's the modeling material that Redesign used to carry. There's a lot of different things you can use to fill the molds, and they're even food safe, so you can even use them for like what should I call it, like what do you call it, the cake fondant? You could use it for fondant if you want to make fancy chocolates and stuff like that, fill it with chocolate. You can make fancy butter, I don't know, anything. You can put anything in here, and you know, food safe and all of that. And they are also are temperature safe up to 450. I think it's 450 or 500, something really high like that. So they're they can withstand heat pretty well as well, which is important with resin because resin gets hot. So I'm going to go over that too. But all right, so molds. Redesign with Prima has a lot of different molds. You can check it out in my retail link and see all of them in one place. They are a lot of different styles. So this is the antique scrolls. I'm going to be using this one to fill because I haven't used it yet, so I definitely want to use that one. And then I have a few of these other ones that I was planning on doing too. There's these really cool steampunk ones too. This is the the mechanical Insecta. So there's a lot of different styles, more than you would think. This one is the key one. There's peacocks. There's a ton of different stuff. They just came out with the the farm animals type thing. You know, this one's Finnabair's. Check out the Finnabair line too. She has a lot of amazing stuff. And just a little bit of something for everyone, basically. So you can create any sort of design that you want to using all the different molds, just because they're so diverse. There's just a lot of different styles too. And then the Prima one, these ones are slightly smaller, so I love using these for like jewelry boxes. So you can see the little corners and stuff are perfect for like the little, anyways, so different sizes, different styles, a lot of different things you can use and do. I use a lot of molds. You guys probably know that. I use a ton of molds. So I love my molds. All right, so I think I'm going to start out with clay. The clay is the most common that people use, and it's probably because it's the most accessible. You can get a lot of different air dry clays everywhere. So you can get air dry clays everywhere. Michael's, Walmart, Target, any craft section you can get the clay from. I have my old paper clay from Redesign. This is basically like all clay, so it's a pretty good comparison. I know different clays vary a tiny bit, but in general they're all the same. So hopefully it's not all. Oh, it's hardened a bit. Yeeks. I don't really have any other. I'm gonna have to miss this thing. This is what happens when you don't use something for years and it kind of just sits there. Right. All right. Yeah, this is a few years old, so I gotta say it's it's all kind of crumbly. I'm gonna have to see if I can use some water and revive this thing. Otherwise, I might have to abandon this one. I tried to look for my other clay, but that one dried up too. That's how often I use the clay. All right, sorry, I'm gonna try to knead this thing and soften it up just to demo it to you. Usually clay is super sticky too. It's like, you know, playing with dough. It gets really sticky as well. This one's not because it's dried up quite a bit, but yeah. And I don't really have any old examples really to show you. But with the air dry clays, they're you know, they're sticky, a lot softer than this one is. This one's just a flop. I should have tested it out earlier, but I wasn't thinking about it. Right, let's see, let me find a smaller mold to put this one in so it's not too hard. Okay, found one. I'll use one of the smaller molds, and that way it'll be right, stickiness. But you want an air dry clay that you don't need to bake. You could do one that you can bake, but I think it takes too much time. And then if you're using, you know, trying to create a bunch of molds, it probably isn't your best interest to do that. Okay, so, let's see if this is even gonna work. Let's smush this thing down. Okay, oh my god, this is going horribly. It's not what I was wanting to show, but hopefully, please work. So with the clay a lot softer than this, you're not going to deal with this. It's in fact extremely soft. With the clay, it can be really soft, so harder to pop out. With the clays, you might want to put some cornstarch or flour in the mold in order for it to pop out more easily, just because of the consistency of the clay. It's just a lot thinner, not like this one I'm showing you that's old, but it's like really super soft Play-Doh almost and sticky. So unless you have one that's dried out a bit, you're gonna have some difficulty popping it out of the mold. That's really common, and it's going to not give you the details that you want. So it's always a good idea to put a little bit of oil, use the cooking sprays, you know, the cooking oil sprays, use that, spray it on, flour, cornstarch, anything to make them pop out more easily. This one's not gonna work. Oh boy. Yeah, it's not gonna work, sorry. Okay, clay will not be a demo, but I will go over everything about clay. I'm sorry, I don't have any clay because I don't use it a lot, but it's cheap. Clay is really cheap. You can use it for sure. You don't have to use resin or anything like that. You can definitely use clay. It's just sticky, so I went over that. And then with clay, it will shrink as it dries. So with anything water-based, it's going to slightly shrink. So as it dries, it will shrink about 10%, I want to say, 10% of the size, maybe, as it dries, and it will curl as well. So with the, sorry, I'm trying to get my hand wipes. So they kind of curl up as they dry, and you'll see some cracking. So they're gonna crack especially if you glue it down before it's completely dry, because the glue is holding it and it's shrinking, so it's gonna crack. And that often happens. If you're looking for a kind of an aged look, then, you know, clay is perfect because they'll do the cracking for itself. But if you want to minimize the cracking and stuff, let it dry completely. I put it on a drying rack and then weigh it down after it has dried a bit, so that way the curling doesn't happen as much. It will slightly, depending on the mold itself and the design. If it's not as flat, it's going to curl up slightly, like these scrolls and stuff, because even if you weigh it down, the edges and those areas will still slightly curl up for the clay. So that's another thing with that one. Modeling material. Let's do this one. Hopefully it's, oh boy. All right, this is not as bad, I don't think. Okay, so this is kind of dried up too. It's not going the way I want it. Redesign came out with this modeling material to make it easier to do the molds, and it is a lot easier to use this with the molds, actually. It's not hard to remove, it's firmer, it's not as sticky, but this is not available anymore, but I know some people still have this out there, so I'll just go over it to explain this one as well, in case you still have the modeling material out there. It's this one. This is the Redesign's old modeling material that they used to have. So if you have it out there, I will just go over it really briefly before I demo the resin. Alright, let's try this gear, see if it works. The modeling material is more the consistency of Play-Doh, actually, and it's not sticky, so that's why it was like a great alternative to clay, which is sticky and hard to get it out of it. And then it's kind of pushing it, I would push it into it and then spread it out and get the outer edges to be clean that way. So just like push it in the middle, get the outer cogs, the outer part of the mold in order to get it all around. So it's basically what I'm doing. Sorry, I know some of you can't see this. So this is the modeling material, and then I would kind of just press it out like that to get it clean inside of the mold. Okay, it's not perfect, but so I'm just basically pressing it around the edges to get it within so that it doesn't look too messy. And just like pop it out like this, and then you get it. So this is the modeling material that Redesign used to carry. So if you still have some of this, it's still good to see. I will put my camera down, sorry. So this is the old modeling material that Redesign had. And the difference is it is thicker, it's less sticky, doesn't have the stickiness that the air dry clay does. It's firmer, so it gave you better details. However, like the clay, it still shrinks slightly, so it slightly shrinks, not as much as clay, and then it does curl. So it does curl up a bit. It's a lot tougher than clay. Sometimes the clay crumbles, like if you're doing something fine, like extremely intricate sort of mold. I don't know if I have an example, but it's very tough to remove the clay from it, and then when it dries it will crack or like snap off. So this is why the modeling clay was a lot better than the air dry clay for that one, but it still shrinks slightly, so you might get some cracking if you're using a very big mold. So let's say you're using this one and you glue it on the surface before it's fully dried, which takes a few hours depending on the size of the mold, and it shrinks, so it might crack, especially with the ones that are whole areas, like the rose one. That one always cracked on me as it dried, so it was like one of those things that might happen. Not always, but it does. weigh it down too, because it does curl up as well. So they're basically kind of similar with the air clay and the modeling material. So that's the differences in those ones. And now I'm going to demonstrate resin. Okay, so last thing I'm demoing is the resin. And then I'll go over how to apply the molds and stuff. I just wanted to go over the difference between the three things that you can use to fill molds: the modeling material, clay, redesigned clay, or any other paper clay. Those two are very similar but slightly different. And now we have resin. Resin is entirely different. Resin is very, very different. I'm going to put on my gloves because resin is sticky, and I always end up getting it all over myself. So that's just kind of how I am. So I'm going to wear my new gloves before I start using it. Right. Just going to put on some gloves with this. Always a good idea to use gloves when you're using resin. All right, so let's get to it. Oh, and there's hot glue. I almost forgot. Hot glue. I will actually plug this in, and I'll do the hot glue right after the resin. So I'm going to plug in my hot glue gun. And let it kind of heat up, and then I'll demo hot glue for you. That was the other one. I got distracted by the horrible clay. You want casting resin. You don't want the epoxy resin that dries clear in general. There is one that dries clear that is fast too, but you want a fast resin that sets within 10 minutes, 15 minutes, you know. You don't want the ones that take 24 hours or overnight or any of that sort of thing to dry. There's a few different companies. This one is Fast Cast Resin. And there's the other one, which is the Alumilite resin, casting resin too. So these two brands are very similar. This is just cheaper, so I use this one. But they're both the same as far as quality and that kind of stuff. So you have part 1, part 2, and then I use these little measuring cups with the molds. If I'm not, actually I use them all the time. Reason being, if you do too much of a quantity, let's say you did 2 of these, right? Because you want to do a bunch of molds. So you're thinking, well, if I do a ton, you know, if I do more of the epoxy, then I can fill more molds. No, you cannot. It will seize up on you because the resin casts so quickly. Within, you know, a few minutes of using it, it's going to harden, and you're just going to get resin that you can't pour out. It's going to turn white and solidify. So always do it in small quantities, even if you're doing a bunch of molds. So even if you're doing a bunch of molds, do these in small parts at a time, and not like a huge part, because you'll just waste your resin, and that won't be good. So I just use this for accuracy purposes. These are like the medicine measuring ones. You can buy this online. I got this off of Amazon. Then so all over the place today. Okay, I'm just gonna cap this in case I spill it, which happens a lot. And then I just use these popsicle sticks to like mix it up and get the resin. only takes like a couple of minutes for it to work. Once you get it all nice and stirred, and then you just pour it inside. This is a little bit uneven. And then you just pour it inside the mold. I try to pour it in the larger area first so that it kind of runs everywhere and fills in the more narrow spots. Narrow spots are trickier to pour, especially if you've had too much caffeine that day and then your hand starts shaking. That happens. Now I'm just pouring it in the other areas, making sure I get it everywhere. And sometimes it's difficult to tell because it's clear if you manage to get it everywhere. So sometimes it's hard to tell, especially with the smaller ones, if you manage to get it into all the little nooks and crannies of the mold. I got an extra, so I'm going to make an extra. These. Starting to... Right, so I'm pouring it some extras because I hate wasting the resin, so I just make extra molds. End up making extra molds that I use later on, and it saves me time too, so I already have them available. I have a whole bag full of extra molds that I did. Alright, I'm going to set that aside, and it's going to cure. And it'll turn white as it cures. So I will pop those out in a bit. I'm going to move on to hot glue. Okay, hot glue. If you're doing hot glue, make sure you have an industrial strength hot glue gun. You can't use the little craft ones because your hot glue is going to dry really fast, and it's not going to work. It's not going to level off. It's not going to fit inside all of it, so you need one that's fairly powerful, a large hot glue gun, in order to fill the molds. I'm gonna do it on a smaller one to show you, and then I'll do it on a larger one to show you the difference in that. Sorry, all these little bits everywhere. Okay, I think I have enough. This hot glue. Where did it go? Right here. All right. Ooh. Sorry about that. I forgot that. I'm going to have to have my husband grab it. Let me move you up closer so you can actually see it too as I do it. Whoops, sorry. I'm readjusting this so you can actually see it up close, because hot glue is one of those things that is difficult to see if you're not close up. Is that closer up? This camera, it's not very close up. Okay. I think that's dried enough. So hot glue, you just basically put the hot glue inside. Nothing too complicated. So I'm just gonna squeeze the hot glue in. Right. work because it's too skinny. We'll see. Maybe I can press it down. Sorry, have the right size. So I'm just filling it up with the glue. It's a bit hard to see some of the smaller spaces here. And then I'm trying to get it to be even as much as I can. And improvise this. Okay, is it? I think I got it everywhere. Should be okay. Okay, so I'm gonna let that dry, or cool down, I should say. Let that cool down. That was the hot glue. Not as quick as the resin, as you can see. It's easier to pour the resin, and it's faster to do lots of molds with the resin. The hot glue takes a bit longer because you're trying to fill it. And then depending on how big your mold is, you know, it takes longer and more glue. And then when you have the more like intricate stuff, it's a little bit trickier to do too because it gets messy. With the bigger molds, it's easier. So I'll do one of these smaller ones to show you compared to the larger. So let's do one of these little ones. Sorry, I have the wrong size of glue. It's not really working that much. Not working as well as I wanted to. So yeah, it helps to have the right size. This is for my little craft one, which I told you not to use. All right, trying to get it everywhere. It's hard to see it, so that's another thing. It's kind of difficult to see where it is. I think it's in every corner. Okay, got it in one of the tiny ones, so I'll show you the difference there in a bit. Still hasn't quite dried yet, and I did not get it everywhere. Did not get it everywhere. That's why I have a hard time with hot glue, because I can't see if I miss some spots. It's hard to tell. That's it. Just for me, maybe I'm just like impaired or something. I mean, I do have terrible eyesight, but okay. So just let that one dry even more. You can use a, I recommend using a tougher sort of hot glue, like the Gorilla glue guns, or not glue guns, the Gorilla glue sticks, hot glue sticks, just for durability reasons. So you don't want to go cheap and use too cheap of hot glue either, because they'll break. Just from my experience. These are the previous hot glue molds I made before. I was testing it out, the different methods. So this is the one, I ended up actually ripping it off the jewelry armoire because I was so frustrated. But this is the hot glue molds that I actually did make before. They're bendable, fully flexible, they'll stay flexible. That's one of the pluses of this. So if you're doing it around curved surfaces, it's going to stay bendy for you. And it does great detail. So if you can see, despite the staining, it has great definition too, as far as that. So that's the plus of hot glue. It stays bendable, good definition, better than clay, better than the modeling material, as far as the details go. So I'm trying to show you guys. So you can see the details are nice and sharp with the glue. Okay, so those are the pluses of hot glue. It's cheaper than resin, so that's another plus. Is it though? I don't know, I'll have to calculate that, because if I use the Gorilla Glue sticks, it takes like 3 of them to really get a big mold. So in the end, I don't think it's that much cheaper, honestly. Yeah, I don't think it's that much cheaper than resin. One of these cost me $21, so it wasn't that expensive considering everything. And now the resin has whitened, and that's when you know that it's set. You can see it's still bendy. This needs a little bit more time because it's not going to pop out clean, but you can see that it sets fairly quickly. It works fast. If I had stirred it more, it would have worked even more fast, but I was kind of afraid of it seizing up. So you can see that the resin one is already hardening up. The hot glue one is good, I think. All right, let's pop this guy out. Okay, so really fast cure time. So that's good. So this is the hot glue one right here. That's the hot glue. And you do have to clean it up, the little areas around it, because you're not pouring it, so it's not quite leveling like resin does. It kind of gets stringy on the edges. Not a big deal, you can clean it really easily. But it is something that you want to consider. A bit uneven on the back, some air bubbles got in there, so air bubbles, some air bubbles in here in the back, just because of how hot the glue has to be in order for it to even up better. But it stays soft, so that's the thing about it. It's slick like the resin is, so not much difference there. It's gonna pick off all these little areas. However, the back isn't as level as resin, so it kind of gets a little bit bumpy sometimes with the hot glue on the back. I'll show you on my other ones, though it's more of the actual glue. So it's a bit uneven on the back of the hot glue. It doesn't level like the resin does. It is pretty level. Don't get me wrong, it's not bad, but it is not as straight as resin is. Resin is completely leveled, you know, gravity. So, but the hot glue, as it dries, because it dries so quickly, you can see how fast it dried, right? So that creates the air pockets, and it causes difficulty with the leveling as far as the back. It's not terrible, but that does bother me because when I glue these on, I need it to be totally flush to the surface so that there aren't any areas popping up for it. So that's why I prefer resin more, is just because of the level of the back. I need it to be completely flush to glue it on. You can also nail this on. So if you're worried about the hot glue staying on, you can nail it on using the little nails, you know, they use for hardware to keep it there. So you can use those little nails and then the glue, and that will make sure it's on securely. if you're worried about that, which I would be. These are the things I use for gluing the molds, or this is what I recommend for gluing the molds. I use E6000 as my preferred method for gluing. However, I would also recommend the Gorilla Wood Glue. This one's really tough. And then there's the Gorilla Glue Original. Super tough, but it kind of foams. So with this one, just be careful. If you use it, it kind of like foams up on the sides as it dries. So this one, be really careful, but it is super tough. I mean, it glues on there. The wood glue is good too. And then E6000, which is what I use. So those are the things I use for gluing molds. All right, this guy looks like it's about ready to come out. It's a thicker mold, so it takes a little bit more time. Let me see if the cogs are better. No, it's taking, yeah, this is still bendy. Didn't mix it as much as I usually do, but no big deal. I have some extras. I was going to show you how you can paint them. Okay, I have some of these. These are resin ones, so I made these ones. These are my extra, one of my hundreds of extra ones, so I have these. And I wanted to show you how you can paint them, color them, use waxes and things like that. The resin I'm using right now is the fast cast resin. You can find it in Michael's or order it on Amazon. There's different sizes. This is 32 ounce. There's the 18, half of 16 ounces, something like that. So there's like the smaller ones too, if you wanted to use those. Okay, so with these molds, you can use waxes on them, most definitely, but there's a extra step that you need to take with resin, and I'll show you why. Alright, so here are some of my waxes. I'm going to use the new one. This is the Cosmic Ray Gold, so I'll use this one on the mold. Alright, you can see this one's like a really pretty copper orange, like a bright orange gold. So that's the color of this wine. And I'm going to go ahead and do it on the larger one so you can see. Alright, so, you know, brush it on like normal, right? This applies to hardware, so if you're using decor wax on hardware, this will happen too. So this is exactly what will happen. You can see it's not completely covered. It looks, you know, covered a bit, but it's not, because the wax is slick and the resin is slick, so it will come off as being less opaque. So with the waxes, you want to make sure you paint them first with like something to give it grip. Do not just put wax directly on the resin. It's not going to work as well and it'll drive you crazy. So just make sure that when you are, if you are using the wax, you need a paint over it. Same with the hot glue. This applies to the hot glue too. And I can show you. So, turn off this. Set this down. So I'll show you the hot glue as well. Wax all over it. Sorry guys. So I'm putting wax over the hot glue. So same thing kind of happens there. It doesn't cover it well with the wax. So it kind of comes off too. You need to let it cure completely, but it doesn't go on as opaque as I would like it. So again, you need to put some sort of paint over it or prime it at the very least to give the decor wax some grip on it. This doesn't apply to paint. So paint will adhere to the resin really well. Of any kind, paints of any kind will work really well. It's just if you're using something slick like the waxes, you need to take that extra step. So just for the people who didn't know that, with the waxes and stuff. All right, I think this guy's really ready now. Okay, now it's ready. Popping this out of the mold. Hot glue and resin, as you can see, no issues popping it out of the mold. Comes out really easy. So, comes out perfect. So you can see the details on this are nice and sharp. Hot glue gave it kind of that sharpness, but not quite as much, just because of the way it levels and dries. So the resin is the one that has the most clear definition. It has the most definition for as far as sharp details go with any of the mediums that you use. So this will give you the sharpest, won't crack, won't curl. You can heat it up again to make it bendable. I was going to demonstrate that too. Sorry, I'm going over everything, so if you guys are bored and already know this, like, feel free to just jump ship. But I'm going over pretty much everything I know about molds. Alright, so it's going to show you how to make them bendable again. Alright, just plugging in my heat gun. Resin will become soft when it comes to heat. It softens up. So I'm going to do one of these keys, I think. So this one isn't as clean as okay, so I'm going to reheat one of these keys to show you. It's not, obviously it's not bendy at all. It's, yeah, not even bendable. This one that I used, I didn't like. So I'm going to reheat it up. So you can see it's bendy, right? So if you heat it up, it will bend. And it actually dries really fast. So just heat the resin up again. You can use a blow dryer too, might take you a slightly bit longer, but the same, applies. You can pop them in your microwave even. Boil them. I mean, anything with heat will soften them. So if you need it to bend again, you can just heat it back up. So pretty simple to do. The thicker ones, you're going to have a little bit more effort to do that, because if it's a thicker area, then it takes longer to heat it back up. But you can go ahead and glue the resin or the resin molds right after they come out too, on a curved surface, because they're going to be nice and pliable for probably 5 minutes. So they start to stiffen for a while, but after 5 minutes, then you probably want to watch out so they harden depending on how much you stir too. So if you plan on doing this over a curved surface, I recommend you don't stir as long in order to keep this bendy as long as possible. If you stir, let's say for a minute instead of a few seconds, so stir for a few seconds, 15 seconds, if you're wanting bendy resin. If not, stir for 30 and it will harden up a lot more quickly, but you know, you won't have as much time to actually glue it over something curved as you would if you don't stir as much. So that's just another little tip for that. And then you would just use one of these glues and tape it down. So tape it down with painter's tape. Always tape it down even if it's a flat surface, because it might lift up slightly on the edge. It does this weird thing where it might lift up slightly so that it's not completely flush on the surface, let's say, like this, nice and completely flat. And it might lift a little bit like that, you know, like tiny bit. So you want to make sure you have it nicely taped down. The easiest way is to just glue it on the surface, like lay down the surface, put these guys on there, glue it on, and weigh it down with books, like large books. And I just like weigh it down for an hour, take it back off, and the glue has set and it's nice and clean on there completely, you know, even. For me, that's like a must. You must have it completely flush. So that's just another thing with these molds. Same with the hot glue. Even with the hot glue one, you need it to be nice and flush against the surface if you can. However, it's a bit uneven on the edge. It's not as flat as the resin. So if you, as much as you can, try to get it nice and flat on there. All right, last part, painting them. So go ahead and paint this guy. I'm going to use the base paints, and I'll paint the other one with the metallic. So I'm going to paint this one with the chalk-based paint. I'm using, this is my signature color line. This is the beautiful Cheroit. They're named after jewels because this is a jewel tone paint line. So I'm using that, and it's chalk based. So it's a chalk based paint. You'll find it very similar to any sort of paint you're using. And just give it a good sweep. This one has really excellent coverage. A little bit more. I don't want to do it too thick on there because I do want it to dry in time for you guys. Probably use my heat gun to rush the drying. I just wanted you to see it painted on there, stabbing the edges. I often paint the molds first before I glue them on, just because it's it looks neater that way, like nice and clean, I mean, that way, versus gluing it on and then trying to paint it a different color. You know, unless you have like perfect steady hand, it's hard to get it nice and neat on there. So you can paint it first. I do it a lot, unless I'm doing some sort of like patina texturing or blending it in, then I glue it on, and you know, but you can paint them first. There's no reason why you can't. Just gonna do one of the redesigned metallics. Jewel effect paste. Let's see if I have. Okay, I don't have the new metallic effect ones, but these work just as well. So these are acrylic metallic based paints. So I'll just demo one of these. The Redesign one is very similar, it's just larger and the colors are different. So this is an acrylic based metallic paint. And I'm going to brush it on there with the brush that works, hopefully. Okay, I'll use my calligraphy brush. So just brushing it on there. I love this color, it's so pretty. It's like a deep, deep plum color. I wish I could get this in like a quart, because I would totally paint a piece of furniture with this color. Okay, so this is the acrylic. I just want to show you, you can use any sort of paint you want to. Chalk, mineral based, acrylic based, anything on these. Right, the acrylics usually dry faster, but we'll see. Let's try to get this over the edges because I am going to use this. Dab it around. These little edge parts are always where I miss it. Okay, I'm going to dry this real quick too, just so you can see. So this one's dried. I missed a spot, but this is all dried. This is the clay-based one on the mold. Let's see, acrylic. It's a little bit more time to dry, but this is the acrylic one, the acrylic metallic paint. And you can see it's still bendy because of the heat, so it's still super flexible with the heat. So when you heat it up, it really does soften it. And since this is already soft now, it's like even floppier. So if you need to make these soft again, definitely heat. So yeah, this is the metallic. And then this one, I'm gonna gild it with some of the decor wax to bring out the details. So let me go ahead and use the Cosmic Ray Gold again, but this time over the paint. So it's going to do it over with my finger. if you want just the top details, it's better to use just your finger versus a brush. But if you want to get the wax over a larger area, then use a brush instead. Okay, so you can see how the wax really brings up the raised areas and the detailing on these molds. You can see it brought out all the details on it with the decor wax. So you can see that. So yeah, that is basically it for the molds. Just watch on replay if you want to catch the very beginning where I attempted to demonstrate the clay very poorly in the modeling material, which had already dried. Sorry guys, I had these for a couple of years and they just, even though they were unopened, they just dried up. So, but I went over the differences too with the modeling material, the clay, resin, hot glue, resin. So resin and hot glue. And these are the mediums that are the most commonly used. So if you have another suggestion, feel free to comment and suggest it. These are just the ones off the top of my head I can think of that people use. So you have 4 different mediums, and just use whichever is best for you within your budget, that you can get at hand. I know with modeling material it's discontinued, so you probably can't, they're still out there, so if you're interested in it, it is still out there. The resin you can find at craft stores too, casting resin. Make sure it's casting resin and it's not the epoxy resin that takes hours to dry. It will still dry and it will still work, but you'll have to wait considerably longer time than you do with the casting resin. So this is the casting resin that I used. I'll add a link after I'm done where you can purchase this. And as you can see, you can paint them with different things: acrylic, chalk-based paint. Just do not add the wax directly on the hot glue ones or the resin because it doesn't give you good coverage. So you can see it's you would have to do a few layers, and you would have to wait till the wax has cured a bit so that you're not just scraping off the wax again. So you would need to let it set for a couple hours, then reapply it, which is something that you could avoid if you just paint it first. And it takes less time, so make sure it has something to grip on with the decor wax. Not the metallic paints are fine, they work perfectly, so you don't need to like prime it or anything. You don't need to prime these, but you can use a primer if you're just wanting to use the decor wax on top of it real quick and stuff. And here's again the resin one. So this one is all stiffening because it's thicker. But you can see it's pretty nice and sharp details, which is why I prefer it. But just know the alternatives, and you have a bunch of choices that you can use. Here's the modeling material that I used with this one. Make sure you dust the molds with some flour, cornstarch, spray some oil or something to give it some pull if you're using clay. So if you're going to use clay, it's stickier. It will get stuck in the molds unless you let it dry completely. So just make sure you dust it with something before you use the clay. That's one of the other things about the clay. And the clay shrinks, it cracks, which can be a good thing if you're looking for that. Just know that that's what happens with the clay. And you want to flatten it if you don't want it to curl up. But it will slightly anyways, just because you can only flatten so much. So just be aware of that. If you're going to use clay, let it dry halfway before you glue it on, because as it shrinks, it's going to pull and crack open. So you're going to get those larger fissures and cracks if you glue it too early. So don't glue the clay on directly. Let it dry halfway at least first before you glue it on. You can use these glues. I recommend these glues. Careful with this one, it foams. This is the E6000. So these are the most durable glues that I recommend using, so the molds don't pop off. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So that is everything I know about molds in this long live. If you have any other questions, feel free to comment and I will go back and answer you. Thanks for watching, and I hope this answered all of your questions. If you had any questions about molds and what to use and what mediums and the differences between all of them, because each is slightly different. So yeah, whatever works best for you guys.